It was a real-life Gone Girl, a case that captivated the nation with endless twists straight out of pop fiction. But this girl was uniquely gone in the head with her scheme. These are the weirdest, creepiest details about one of the most disturbing hoaxes of the century. On November 2nd, 2016, Sherri Papini went out jogging and never came back. Her husband, Keith, only realized she was gone later that day when he got home from work to find the house empty. Sherri was nowhere to be found, and their 2 children, who were supposed to have been picked up by Sherri from a nearby daycare center in their hometown of Redding, California, were gone as well. The kids were fine. They were still at daycare, but Sherri had vanished into thin air. Where? Well, that was the mystery that continued to unfold for years after the fact. We won't drag it out for those who know the story. 22 days after she went missing, Sherri reappeared on her own. A trucker spotted her on the side of the road in the early hours of the morning in the countryside of Yolo County, about 150 miles south of where she'd gone missing. The sight was shocking. She had remnants of zip ties, hose clamps, and chains around her wrists, ankles, and waist. She was covered in mottled bruises. Her long hair had been roughly chopped above her shoulders, and strangest of all, her right shoulder had been partially branded with the word Exodus in all caps. The trucker called 911, and she was taken to the hospital and to a tearful reunion with Keith and their kids. It was the end of a long 3 weeks for the Papini family, but as we know now, this twisted story was just getting started. No longer search and rescue, the investigation pivoted into a manhunt to find Sherri's kidnappers. Sherri told detectives that she'd been jogging when a dark SUV pulled up and 2 Hispanic women wearing masks forced her into the back seat and put a pillowcase over her head. She didn't know where they took her, but they chained her to a closet and put drugs in her food for the next 3 weeks. Then, one day, one of the women just set her free. She gave detailed descriptions of her captors and her prison, all the way down to small details like a black coffee table and a custom closet with a threaded rod in the center to hold her chain. At some point during this, the FBI took an interest in the case. They brought in a sketch artist and released drawings of 2 Hispanic women with a $10,000 reward for any information leading to their arrest. Hundreds of tips came in through the hotline, none of which actually led to anything concrete. As man-hours and tax dollars poured into the investigation, it seemed like the police were no closer to closing the case than they'd been the evening Sherri disappeared. Describing her environment in such minute detail must have seemed like a surefire way to give her story some validity, but eventually those same details became the start of a noose that slowly began to tighten around Sherri's neck. One of the clues that ultimately brought the case to an end was a set of DNA that had been pulled off Sherri the morning she reappeared. Some of the DNA was from an unknown male, and eventually police found a match. James Reyes was an ex-boyfriend of Sherri's from before her time with Keith, and while he didn't initially admit to anything, his apartment had a couple little strange coincidences, like a suspiciously perfect version of the one-of-a-kind closet Sherri had described, complete with a threaded rod running vertically down the center. Presented with the DNA evidence, Reyes flipped almost immediately, saying that Sherri had asked him to do everything: rent a car and pick her up, take her to his apartment, and assist her in covering herself in marks and bruises. He even admitted to buying a wood-burning tool to do the brand at her request. In other words, it was all an elaborate hoax. Sherri was brought in for questioning on August 13th, 2020, but even when she was presented with the entire story as told by Reyes, who'd passed a polygraph test, she continued to deny it.
If that's not what happened, what did happen, Sherri?
I don't know. No, there's no way it's James.
After that interrogation session, it took until March 2022 for detectives to compile enough evidence to arrest her. The charges were mail fraud and making false statements to federal agents.
All we want is truthful statements because it's a crime to lie to federal officers.
After the media circus and everything that had happened, a few seemingly low-level federal charges felt, well, a little anticlimactic. But technically, just by disappearing, Sherri didn't break any laws. Leaving your family for a few weeks to hang out with an ex-boyfriend isn't nice, but it isn't illegal either. In fact, she could have disappeared forever if no one cared enough to look for her. But once Keith called 911 and got a police search party in motion, the snowball started rolling downhill. In her signed plea deal, Sherri finally admitted to planning the hoax, and that, it seemed, was the end of it. All told, the case stretched from her disappearance on November 2nd, 2016 until her arrest on March 3rd, 2022. That's years and years of pointless effort and drained resources.
Do you have anything to say to law enforcement that has taken 5.5 years of trying to solve this crime?
In the course of the investigation, nearly 20 warrants were issued giving police access to Sherri's phone records, her internet history, and CCTV footage from locations she frequented and near the spot of her disappearance. One of the warrants sent agents on a wild goose chase to Michigan. Shasta County detectives and FBI agents fielded hundreds of worthless tips in their attempts to locate the 2 fictional women who'd supposedly kidnapped Sherri. That kind of manpower doesn't come cheap. Then there were contributions from the California Victim Compensation Board, a state institution that provides financial aid for for victims of violent crimes. They'll help cover things like medical expenses, therapy, and income loss during recovery. And you probably know where this is going. According to a court affidavit, the Victim Compensation Board paid Sherri over $30,000 between 2017 and 2021. Tack on the time wasted by police and the FBI during the whole deal, and in addition to an 18-month prison sentence, the judge ordered Sherri to repay just over $300,000. So why? Why would someone orchestrate their own kidnapping only to return to the life they'd just left? That's really the lingering question, and the deeper you dig, the weirder everything gets. Once the case started to get nationwide coverage, the initial sentiment was that it was a homegrown American tragedy. Sherri was portrayed as the perfect mom and perfect wife turned victim of something unknown and likely horrifying. But that didn't last forever. One of the first steps in the investigation was, of course, to question Keith. You always have to suspect the husband. Simultaneously, detectives were corroborating his story with friends, family, and neighbors. That's when the first hints appeared that something about the whole thing was off. Two versions of reality began to emerge. One version was the happy, Instagram perfect family plastered over every primetime news channel. The other was built on stories from neighbors who overheard heated arguments from the Papini house and stories Sherri had told her friends about a hidden, violent side to Keith. But even that wasn't so clear-cut. For example, a story relayed by Sherri's friend about an angry Keith giving his wife a black eye turned out to be half true. She'd gotten a black eye, but accidentally, while they were playing Wii with some other friends.
I will tell you, she does tend to be a little dramatic, a little exaggerative.
A disappointing pattern started to emerge based on these character testimonies. Basically, figuring out any sort of truth about Sherri was going to be tough. Any given incident could have played out completely differently depending on who was telling the story. And that aspect pretty much came to define everything about the whole saga.
With this investigation, it felt like the more people you talked to, the more you found that you were just back to square one.
There were other ripples and repercussions as well. Tragically enough, the area around Redding, California isn't completely unfamiliar with unsolved disappearances. In 1998, 23-year-old Tara Smith went missing and was never found. So when the same thing appeared to happen to Sherri, it felt like an echo of that earlier tragedy. In the weeks that Sherri was gone, hundreds of volunteers mobilized to search the surrounding woods and neighborhoods. While in their homes, many of the residents feared that there was a kidnapper on the loose, and they or someone in their families might be next.
So we were as women in the town, I think we were all scared and worried that who's going to be next.
It might be a stretch to say that Sherri's hoax held Redding in the grip of terror, but there was certainly unease, anxiety, and more than a little fear in those November weeks. Worse, it appears that the Tara Smith case may have directly influenced the details of Sherri's plans. Needless to say, that little detail didn't sit well with the members of the community. Another side effect of Sherri's story, unintentional or not, was a harsh focus on the Hispanic community in the area. The police were in full force patrolling ethnic neighborhoods, and the sketch of the two supposed abductors was being splashed on every street corner and evening news segment in the area. It was a stressful time for anyone who felt they might be wrongly profiled for the crime.
Women in the Hispanic or Latino community didn't want to drive together, hang out together, walk the streets together.
All kinds of vitriol was directed at the Hispanic community around that time, and after the dust settled, accusations of racism were leveled at Sherri for honing in on that specific, stereotypical description when she created the story.
Do you remember any music as you were driving in the car?
Yes, mariachi music.
Throughout the whole debacle, there were plenty of people who instinctually felt that some of the details didn't add up. In fact, journalists had started poking holes in her story almost since the very beginning. On November 29th, only 5 days after she turned up alive, Inquisitor published an article pointing out online chatter that the whole thing was just an elaborate hoax. That's a pretty wild thing to allege so soon. So where did that idea come from? Well, there was the location where the abduction was supposed to have happened. The intersection is in a rural area, sure, but as one blogger pointed out, in full view of no less than 5 houses. Considering Sherri went missing in the middle of the day, it seemed unlikely that nobody noticed anything.
And so it would have been pretty gutsy for anybody to stop there, wrestle a young woman into the car, and take off.
He also pointed to the lack of marks or scuffs in the gravel road indicating a struggle, and drew attention to the rather neat way Sherri's phone had been left in the grass, with the earbuds rolled up. And remember, those suspicions were all posted online in 2016. It's obvious in hindsight now, but there was a huge segment of people who were suspicious from the very start. One of the initial pieces published in the wake of Sherri's reappearance appeared on Heavy.com and featured an interview from an anonymous family friend who alleged that this wasn't the first time Sherri had faked her own kidnapping. It was rather sort of her MO. The article is no longer live, but the source claimed that Sherri had, quote, staged her own abduction in 2006. There's no record of that happening, but others have suggested that there were similar instances in the past. On Hulu's Perfect Wife, various friends and family said that she would often go off on her own without telling anyone, though never for that amount of time. Did Sherri spend a lot of time thinking about making herself scarce? The evidence suggests that the 2016 self-napping at least was nearly a year in the planning.
These are some of Sherri's books that she had left here. I think she was definitely trying certain things out.
Court documents show that she was bringing up the subject with Reyes as early as December 2015. They had the forethought to use burner phones, so their communication wouldn't show up in what would inevitably become a police investigation. But those eventually became a fairly damning part of the evidence against her. Clearly, all the clues in the investigation started to paint a much different picture of Sherri than the surface-level view suggested. Remember that warrant we mentioned that was served in Michigan? In Sherri's phone records, police had found texts between her and a man from Lansing who was attempting to meet with her. According to interviews he gave to the police during the investigation, he had met Sherri 5 years earlier when she was in Michigan for a convention. They spent much of the evening drinking at various bars, and the way she described Keith to him was as a violent abuser who basically kept her trapped at home. Sherri and the man texted off and on in the years after that until April 2016 when they began to talk more regularly about meeting up during a trip to California. Time says there was infidelity involved during the Michigan convention, while Hulu's 2024 docuseries Perfect Wife doesn't go so far as to make that explicit. But either way, the text records show a secret side to Sherri that nobody else was fully aware of. Getting a straight story out of co-conspirators is a bit like trying to wring the ocean dry. Although she pled guilty, both Sherri and Reyes still have completely different stories about how things played out. Reyes said he was just helping a friend. It didn't matter how unusual the circumstances or the requests. He just wanted to do what he could. As we covered, he told detectives that everything he did was because Sherri asked him to do it.
I didn't kidnap her. I just... friend in need asked me for help.
But in 2025, Sherri released a new book called Sherri Papini Doesn't Exist, The Lie That Defined Me, The Media That Destroyed Me, and the Truth That No One Heard. In it, she completely flipped on Reyes, claiming that it was him all along. He kidnapped her against her will and did everything she originally blamed on a pair of made-up women. Needless to say, the response has been skeptical at best. As of this video, Reyes hasn't publicly responded to the claims in her book. Years have passed since Sherri's disappearance, and still more years have passed since her confession and conviction, but the case is still being tried in the court of public opinion, and it's starting to feel like there's a behind-the-scenes PR war happening to sway that opinion in one direction or the other. Hulu's 2024 series Perfect Wife doesn't take a lot of pains to paint Sherri in a flattering light.
She didn't care.
It leans hard into the narrative of an imbalanced narcissist craving the attention of the world, regardless of who got hurt along the way. At the end of that docuseries, a blurb states that the filmmakers attempted to get in touch with Sherri for an interview, but never got a reply from her. Then, May 2025 saw the release of yet another docuseries, Sherri Papini, Caught in the Lie, which references Hulu's series specifically and centers on Sherri's lengthy interviews with the filmmakers. She calls out the Hulu series for being biased and presenting a false image of her for the sake of sensationalism.
The Sherri Papini that's out there, it's not me. She's not real.
Much of the newer series plays like a rebuttal to the older series. It also reinforces her more recent claims that Reyes was the kidnapper and includes her taking a polygraph test while being questioned about her current version of what happens.
Did you ask James to brand you?
No.
The results of that test, as they were interpreted by retired police officer Brett Bartlett, showed that she was telling the truth, mostly. His opinion is that she was part of planning everything, but Reyes took it farther than she expected. So what really happened? At this point, we may never know.
So how can we ever know for sure what happened during those 22 days?
What do you need?
Unfortunately, the saga is ongoing. Sherri served 10 months and 21 days of her sentence, and in August 2023 was released to a halfway house where she stayed for a month. Sherri and Keith divorced, and in March 2024, she was granted monthly 1-hour supervised visits with her children. In March 2025, Sherri and Keith met in court as Sherri sought increased visitation rights and requested that the images of their kids be removed from Hulu's Perfect Wife. In August 2025, the case went to trial. After lengthy testimonies from Sherri, as well as family and friends, the saga again reached an anticlimax. The case was going to be paused, with no dates set for continuance.
So you won't know much after today. Counsel, you in agreement we're going to put the trial on pause?
Yes.
Yes.